So thank you so much to everyone who's here today. I mean, we're really, really excited to share some stories of, how we use the power of film for conservation. Because I think, where we come from at Untamed Planet, which is our production house, is, for the longest time, we've had documentaries about the natural world. And they've always been about how pretty the natural world is, how incredible the wild spaces around us are. But so often we forget to talk about the communities that live alongside wildlife or about, the challenges that these communities face. So today we're going to talk about some of the recent television projects that we've worked on, and each one of them has a really different impact group in the sense that, with one documentary, we're really aiming to create policy change. With other documentaries, we're really looking towards changing the minds and hearts of young people, especially. And we'd love to tell you more about that through these films.
All right. So, okay. So I think we can start by talking about the first film that Malaika and I ever made together, that was more than 5 years ago now. If I'm, yeah. Um, and it was supposed to be about a tiger. It was supposed to be a natural history film. And Malaika and I, we reached this location in central India uh, in order to film a male tiger that was supposed to be the largest tiger in India at that point of time. This particular tiger in a national park in central India had gained a lot of attention. Photographers were flocking there to photograph him. And we said, hey, we want to make a film about him. But when we got there, we kind of very soon we realized that there's a story that's unfolding right there in that landscape, which is more than just about the tiger, just about um, the natural history of that animal. And that was the conflict between tigers and the local communities that live around the national park. Um, and that is something that we did not know anything about. That's not something that we went there thinking that we wanted to document. But it just so happened that a few days after we got to location, we heard news that there had been an incident where a tiger had come in and killed 7 or 8 cows of a local farmer. Um, and and we just went there to find out what had happened. But that very soon became the crux of our story, to tell the story of how people in India are living right next to tigers, in the midst of tigers, and tigers are living in the midst of people, and how that impacts the community. And I think that was, in a sense, the beginning of us realizing what kind of stories we want to tell, people-centric conservation stories that go beyond just the wildlife and the natural history. And I mean, I think Malaika can speak about some of the experiences from filming Waghoba, which kind of were which had an impact on our journey.
Yeah, I mean, I've grown up absolutely loving tigers, but on one of the days we were filming Waghoba, I met with a girl who was 14 who asked me, why don't you kill the tiger? I mean, this animal is in our backyard. It's killed my grandfather. Why don't you just kill it? Because otherwise it's hurting human life. And that's when I realized that conservation is complex, and therefore conservation storytelling also has to reflect that. It cannot only talk about the wild animals. And if we are only on the side of the wild animals, then we're not going to be able to protect them because, you have to rope communities into conservation efforts. Nitye, could you flip the slide, please?
Right. Well, this is just
The next.
some thumbnails from the film, but our next project was Living with Predators, where we kind of expanded on um, what we experienced while filming Waghoba. And let me actually play a trailer to Living with Predators, and then we can go ahead and talk about that a little more. All right. So give me a second.
So while he's putting that on, Malaika, what did you tell the little girl who asked you, why don't you kill the tiger?
I was like, honestly, you have a legitimate point. If a tiger kills someone that I really loved and cared about in my family, I would honestly have the same perspective. If there was a tiger who made me feel scared every single day about stepping out, I would want that, reflected on television, and I would have that same feeling of hatred and fear. And I think with this series as well, what we realized was that, despite this really challenging ecosystem where people are being attacked by wild animals, where sometimes they have a lot of crop depredation by wild animals. They lose their livestock to wild animals. They have this empathy and this ability to really protect animals despite this challenge that I don't think people in cities often have. We see one fox sometimes and we're really upset that it's in our backyard. But people in these communities have the ability to be really resilient in the face of adversity and protect wildlife in all kinds of situations. And you'll see this in this trailer.
Okay, here we go.
Big cats, the most feared members of the animal kingdom, struggling to find space in modern India. As the city expands rapidly into some of our last remaining wild spaces, humans and big cats are being forced to confront one another. But in some pockets, people are learning to live with big cats. But what is the secret behind this coexistence? To find out, I'm embarking on a journey of a lifetime.
This forest is where the natural world meets the historical world.
Getting up close with these incredible predators.
She's literally 5 strides away from me right now.
And meeting the communities and rangers on the front lines.
Mobile technology is playing such a big role in the fight against wildlife trafficking.
To understand what it's really like to have big cats as neighbors.
It's super tense right now.
If we keep the tiger's neighbors happy, the tiger is happy.
This is the story of coexistence, like never seen before.
I'm Malaika, and I'm looking for the extraordinary relationship that some communities share with big cats in India. So in this particular series, we looked at 3 different big cats: Asiatic lions, leopards, and tigers. And we looked at the different incentives that help local communities to protect big cats. So for example, in the Asiatic lion episode, it's the fact that they have an incredible forest department that's completely from the local community. Because so often with conservation, we have this kind of neo-colonial way of operating, where we have outsiders coming in and telling us what to do with our wildlife. And you have these big international NGOs that are running operations. But sometimes when it's the local communities who are in charge of wildlife protection, that's when you see the most impact. Really, that's when you see positive impact at the grassroots level. And then in the second episode, we looked at the story of tigers in Ranthambore, and that was really interesting because this is a park where the tiger population is pretty big. So the population of tigers has increased quite a lot, and the tigers are now dispersing into human-dominated landscapes. And as they go out, they're obviously encountering people every single day in villages and in cities. But what this community of people do are they're basically wildlife watchers. So every single one of them is a local in the villages around there, and they constantly educate their fellow villagers about the presence of tigers, why tigers are important. If there's any trafficking activity in the area, for example, if there's anyone who is trying to snare a tiger with the trap in the forest, or snare any other kind of animal, they will remove that. They will alert the authorities, because the forest department here realized that they can't have forest department officers every single place. They have to build local ownership. And I think what touched me the most on a personal level was the fact that these communities over here, I mean, they're getting paid barely anything to do this work, but it's only because they actually care about this tiger. They have a sense of pride about having this wildlife in their backyard. And that's what's, making them go out there, look out for traffickers, stop any poaching activity, and protect these tigers in crazy circumstances. And then the third one was in a place called Beira in India, where you have a lot of leopard protection, and leopards have been around for 500 years with barely any cases of conflict, which is pretty rare because leopards do get into a lot of conflict with human beings all across the world. And the reason why the leopards haven't been attacked by humans, and they haven't really attacked too many humans as well, is because humans in this area have a deep spiritual reverence for these animals. So they believe in leopard gods, they pray to a leopard god in their temple, and they genuinely believe that leopards will bring them good luck. So if a leopard does take their sheep, which is really valuable, it's like taking a car of yours. That's the monetary value that, a sheep is to a farmer. They do not retaliate. They do not do anything. They do not poison the carcass. And that's been really helpful for them. They've managed to coexist with these animals for hundreds of years. And I think what was really important to us about telling the series is highlighting the fact that, a one-size-fits-all approach will never work. You cannot just say that, big cat conservation has to be done through the forest department, or you have to exclude communities by creating these boundaries around a national park. Yes, that's required in some places, but in a lot of places, you actually can really protect wildlife by having the communities be a part of the conservation. In other places, you have to create inviolate space for wildlife. Like I know even in Singapore, you guys have incredible spaces of wildlife and nature, and those have been, made open to the public. But in India, I think what we've seen is that we have spaces that are open to the public and open to communities to go inside the forest. And then we also have forests where it's completely cordoned off. And it's just about deciding based on the context what works best for conservation.
Yeah, and I think that's something that we've experienced on any shoot, wherever we've gone. There is, at least in a place like India, and I think that applies to a lot of the rest of South Asia, there is a lot of pride that local communities have for their natural habitat, for the habitat that they live in, for the wildlife that they share space with. And that pride, that sense of pride and sense of ownership can be a very, very powerful tool in protecting any habitat or species. All that's required is for you to set up an environment where that pride can take center stage, and that pride is converted into a feeling of protective feeling towards natural habitat and the environment. And that's something that was, for instance, the picture that you can see right now, these are all village wildlife volunteers in Ranthambore. A lot of these people come from ex-poaching families. Their grandfathers used to be poachers, and the conservation work in this landscape, some of the NGOs that have been working, and even the Indian Forest Department, they've managed to change that around 180 degrees and have instilled a sense of.
Has he frozen?
Yeah, I think it's frozen.
Okay. I think, in the meanwhile, while he's talking about that, I think the general goal was really to talk about how ownership makes a big difference. But
Tribe.
Oh, there you are. You froze for a second there.
More than a second.
Okay.
It's okay. I think you can continue.
Yeah. So what I was saying that in this particular situation, I think ownership does make a big difference. But there are other situations where you cannot tell stories about communities that are always protecting wildlife. There are difficult stories out there. And one of the difficult stories that we told was about the manta ray trade. And that's how we know Michelle, because Michelle trained us in freediving, which was incredibly helpful when we were filming here in the Honey Faru Bay in the Maldives, where you cannot scuba dive. So just having that training allowed me to really get up close with those animals and fall in love with them. I mean, manta rays, for all of the divers and free divers on the group, are such sentient, beautiful, like incredible beings. Like when you hang out with the manta ray, they will come close to you. They will play with you. They're curious about who you are and what you're doing in their, patch of the ocean. And I think that's pretty incredible. So for us to be able to, just spend time with them was really amazing. But then this was one part of the film. The majority of the film was an investigative documentary that dived into understanding the manta ray trade pipeline. So these animals are harvested, as you might know, for their gill plates, which is very popular in parts of Asia and other parts of the world. And, this starts in my country, but in our country, the waters aren't blue like this. They're dark and murky. So the majority of people don't even know that we have these incredible animals in our oceans. And that's why they have zero protection. So you have whale sharks that get a lot of protection in the Indian law. Tigers receive protection, but mantas, zero. So we created this documentary to really create a sense of, awe for these animals in our country and across the world, but also to create a bit of, action on the front that these animals are endangered. They're also biologically vulnerable because they have very few babies compared to, say, sharks or other marine animals. So they're much more biologically vulnerable, and it's very easy to create regional extinction. So we basically documented the trade all the way from India to the Myanmar border to Hong Kong, and then to Guangzhou. And then we followed the trade pipeline back from Guangzhou all the way back to India to the same traders who were exporting stuff. So it was a crazy, crazy adventure. And here's a tiny trailer to show you, what we did while we were filming this.
That in 50 years we've eaten more than 90% of the big fish in the sea.
We as a species learned how to grow food 10,000 years ago. But even today, when it comes to the oceans, we still hunt. My name is Malaika, and I'm an investigative filmmaker, focused on shining a light on the wildlife trade globally. 3 years ago, I discovered a massive trade in manta rays originating from my country's waters.
If there's gill plates there, this is what they're after.
I'm following the trail of this transnational contraband.
Peng Yu Sai?
A trade that could very well mean extinction for one of the most enigmatic ambassadors of our oceans.
I'm sorry if the video was a bit shaky, but what we really wanted to highlight with this film is the fact that, manta rays are emblematic of our oceans today. They are such charismatic beings, and if we leverage their, ability to inspire divers and free divers and ocean enthusiasts, and get more people into the fold, we can actually use that to talk about how species need to be protected. And I think an interesting fact here is that we were looking at how biologically important manta rays are. And I was talking to scientists like Dr. Andrea Marshall, and other scientists who are working on this all across the world. And the truth is that if manta rays did die off, nothing would change. I mean, there might be small changes in the ocean ecosystem, but for the most part, the oceans wouldn't be largely impacted just because they're not apex predators like, say, tiger sharks. So we realized that, just because an animal doesn't have an intrinsic role in our environment doesn't mean that we don't do everything in our ability to protect it. We are stewards of the planet. We have this responsibility as human beings who've done this to these animals to really champion their protection.
Yeah, and I think so. One of the striking thoughts that came to us when we started making this film and started talking to people, especially in India, about this film, often the reaction that we would get was, "Really? Do you have manta rays in India? Aren't manta rays some animals that you see maybe in the Great Barrier Reef in Australia or some exotic location like that?" Most Indians do not know that these animals exist in our waters. I mean, the fact that having awareness about the fact that these animals are being caught in India and are being exported for whatever reason, that's secondary. So we wanted to create a film that can spread awareness, go beyond spreading awareness, go beyond telling people there are manta rays in India and telling them that they are hunted or threatened. We wanted to create a film that can have some kind of a policy impact. And that was something that was on our minds from the very beginning. And therefore, while we were completing our film, we were able to tie up with conservation organizations like the Wildlife Trust of India, which is one of India's biggest advocacy and conservation organization, and WildAid, which is a US-based conservation organization. And with their help, as we were completing the film and telling the story on film, of these animals being caught, exported, sold in another part of the world, we were also able to get a grassroots campaign off the ground in India, where with the help of the Wildlife Trust of India, we had volunteers go out to 6 coastal states in India, and sorry, 9 coastal states in India. Hi, sorry, what?
I said scientists, not volunteers.
Right, of course.
Yeah.
Research assistants go out to coastal states in India and try and establish a baseline of how many manta rays are being caught at which landing sites, how many different species are being caught, what is the variation across the year, what months are heavy, and try and get a sense of what the population numbers are in Indian waters. Because unlike, say, the Maldives or Australia or some of the other prime diving destinations of the world, India doesn't have clean, crystal blue waters. India has dark, murky brown waters. So there could be thousands and thousands of manta rays in several places along our coast, and we wouldn't know it. There would be no tourism potential to it. There would be no way to sell that fact. But these animals do exist there, and it's important to know that they're there. Therefore, so that something can be done to protect them, because they're being fished out in large numbers. And I mean, we spent several days out with fishermen while making this film. We were out on fishing boats, big and large, big and small, spending nights out there while they were looking for manta rays, and many of them did catch manta rays, which was something that we wanted to show in our film. We wanted to have that visually represented, that manta rays are being caught. Right, and I think Malaika can speak about the investigative part of the film that we carried out in Hong Kong and in China.
So I love investigative filmmaking. It's, I think, really, really exciting, and I have this sense of adrenaline that I get from it, but it's also dangerous. So and I have to really accept that, because I often get myself into some tricky situations that I need help getting out of. But with this documentary, we wanted to show how, consumers can so easily buy manta ray gill plates in Hong Kong and Guangzhou. So I pretended to be a seafood trader, which takes a lot of effort, which basically meant that I had to learn about different other kinds of species of animals, because you can't just go in there and ask for a manta ray, because then they'll know you're an environmentalist or a conservationist. So we learned about different species of fish, and we went undercover pretending to be a seafood company, hoping to source different kinds of contraband from Hong Kong and Guangzhou. And this is someone's shop where they were basically making Peng Yu Sai, which is the name of the soup made out of manta rays. And the reason we took this picture and we filmed this in the documentary was because it shows how when you mess with the natural world, it doesn't just have consequences for wildlife, but also for humans. Animals like manta rays bioaccumulate, so they have a lot of toxins that keep building up in their bodies until they reach unhealthy limits. So when a human being, and especially a young woman who's breastfeeding, which is the target audience for a lot of this Peng Yu Sai, drinks this or has the soup as part of her dinner, she is ingesting those toxins, that extremely high amount of mercury and cadmium. And Michelle's been doing research on this as well, so she can talk about that later when we're talking about the film at large. But these animals are not meant to be eaten. And we wanted to show how this documentary really was all about how protecting the natural world needs to have, the human element in. If you protect nature, you can also protect human health. And we're seeing that this is incredibly important right now, given the context of COVID-19 and the pandemic. I mean, we've seen how the wildlife trade is, kind of a petri dish for different kinds of diseases that can just easily spread from humans to wildlife and from wildlife to humans. And then I'd love to show you a little bit about the campaign that we're doing. Nitye, can you flip the slide, please?
Right. Do you want to talk about this first?
Yeah, I mean, this is a picture of the kids playing with manta rays. Manta rays are incredible beings, and they've never ever seen one in the wild. So our goal as filmmakers is to help them, have a world one day where they can go diving with manta rays, and they're still in the oceans when they're adults. So, when we were hanging out with them, it just really It was heartbreaking to see them playing with manta ray, gill plates, and shark fins without even knowing what the original animal even looks like from a picture or otherwise.
Mhm.
And then, as Nitya mentioned earlier, we did a survey with scientists all across India. So we went to all of the landing sites where manta rays are killed on the West Coast, on the East Coast, in the island regions. And right now that we have all of this data, which is the first time we've had data on manta ray landings in my country, which is an enormous country, we're putting together a scientific report that will also be a policy recommendation to the Indian government, saying that these animals are being fished out in these numbers, these species, in these places, basically adding all that data in and saying that we also have this documentary that we'd like for you to watch, and asking them to protect manta rays under Schedule 1 of the Wildlife Protection Act. And for us, it's important because, as filmmakers, it's so easy to think that films are really impactful and that's the solution. But that's not true. Films are great. They touch your heart. Then after they touch your hearts, people don't know what to do with that. Like, what do you do with that emotion that you have after you watch a really impactful film? So as filmmakers, Nitya and I thought that it would be great to kind of have that follow through. It's not possible with every single documentary you work on, but with ones that you really care about, with species that you connect with, like we have with manta rays, you have to put in that little bit of extra effort to make sure that you actually that your film and your work is resulting in tangible change at the grassroots level for these animals. Yes, the next one, please.
Right. Can you guys see my screen?
Yeah, we can see it.
Yeah. So this was our next project after we completed our manta ray film, which was for the BBC for a program called Planet Defenders. And we, after having done an investigative film like the manta ray trade, we wanted to look into something a little different with the elephant tourism situation in India. So this film kind of tracks how wild elephants in India are captured, often quite brutally, for the tourism industry. And when anyone in India goes to a tourist destination, elephant rides are one of the most attractive offerings. Tourists often flock to elephant orphanages where they get to play with elephants, give them a bath, and scrub them. And we really wanted to convey that if you are an animal lover and you're going to a place like this to spend time with an elephant, this is not you're not doing a favor to the animals. Most organizations like this run on exploiting the animal. The animals are captured, often from the wild, and even if not from the wild, the rehabilitation of the animal is, instead of rehabilitating the animal ends up in a tourism outfit where the living conditions are very, very poor. There's a lot of abuse. Elephants are very, very sentient animals. They have personalities. They have interpersonal relationships with other elephants, and just like human beings, they need that sense of family, that sense of community, and that is completely missing in a tourist outfit, where some elephants that live long could spend 30, 40, 50 years giving rides to human beings. And we wanted to spread the message and convey that is, if you're patronizing an organization like that, you're not doing anything for conservation there. And I think Malaika can speak about some of the experiences of filming undercover for this in Jaipur and at the tourism organizations.
So we did a lot of undercover filmmaking. A lot of that didn't make it into the film, to be honest, because it was a film for kids, and I was gutted when I saw the final edit in parts. But I was also really excited to see the edit because the way it was crafted was, I think, interesting because when you have an audience of young people, you have to play to their strengths. You have to make the documentary really fast-paced, action-oriented, and also not show them too much gore. We're used to, through our manta ray documentary, really showing every single part of the trade, and in this film we couldn't, because you had audiences who were as young as say 7 and 8 watching this show. and you don't want to put them off and have them change the channel and be scarred for life. So we did show them, how the animals are kept in captivity, what are the conditions that they are subjected to. And we realized that, it's a very lucrative industry as well. I mean, these animals are bought for huge, huge amounts. And because of the fact that there are so many people across the world, especially from the UK and the US, who want to ride elephants when they come on an exotic vacation to India, the owners can make that money back in a while. So the number of elephants that they keep buying just increases. And I think the broader point that we were making is that, when it comes to wildlife trafficking, we always just think of China, we think of Hong Kong, we think about parts of Asia. But wildlife trafficking is so much bigger than that. And so many of us have been complicit. In the film, as a presenter, I talked about my personal experiences of riding elephants because I have, as a young person, I've been guilty of doing that. Because no one is perfect, and you have to be your authentic self on television as well. And I think what we wanted to do was show that, even if you have ridden an elephant in the past, even if you have gone and, petted a tiger in a zoo in Thailand, or a pet in cave anywhere across the world, it's really important that you kind of stand by what you believe in now and advocate for animals to be protected and to be wild, even though you might have made mistakes in the past. And then, Nitye, can you go to the next slide, please? In the end of the film, we wanted to show the positive solutions out there. So besides banning the elephant trade, which is what some people are working on right now, and I think that's going to be really, really good for elephant conservation, we also highlighted this really amazing rescue center where you have elephants that have spent their entire life in captivity, say 50 years, finally coming to this rescue center and just breathing free, walking without shackles on their legs, not being whipped by human beings with, horribly strong objects and weapons, and not being forced to do things that wild animals shouldn't be forced to do. And even within the course of a couple of months, these animals that are usually shy and don't have personalities and have injuries and are, just really battered up from being in a city, being constantly used to be, riding elephants, they come alive, they form friendships. I mean, these two elephants, Lakshmi and Achal, became friends within a few months, and now they're inseparable. You cannot keep them apart from each other. And that's pretty amazing to see, because these animals are social, and even though they will never find their way back into the wild where their families are and where their families will continue to be, at least they're finding this new family of sorts. And for us, we really wanted to get this audience of young people to watch it in the UK and all across the world, in America and all across the world, because, that's the generation that can make a choice. The next time those kids are on vacation and their parents want to, get them on an elephant and take a cool picture for their Instagram, they can be like, hey, we watched this documentary and we don't think it's right. These animals don't look happy and they're not supposed to be ridden. And that's the impact that we hope to have, as this film is playing across the world.
Yeah. All right. Right. So now the next project that we're going to talk about is a film, a feature we did for Al Jazeera, Earthrise. Earthrise is an environmental solutions show, and for their upcoming season after the pandemic, they wanted to do a story on bat conservation, especially given that bats have been at the receiving end of a lot of negative attitudes and negative press after COVID, including several incidents where bats have been killed or culled in Indonesia, parts of India, just because people were afraid that these animals were somehow linked to the spread of COVID. And therefore, we did a story on a species of bat called the Kolar leaf-nosed bat, which happens to be one of India's most endangered bats. There's only one known population of this bat in all of India, actually all of the world, if I'm not wrong, in a little cave, maybe 2 hours away from Bangalore in India, and that's the only population known to science. And this is the site of a very incredible bat conservation story. So I'm going to play just a little clip, the beginning of the program, and then.
Hello and welcome to a new series of Earthrise. It's pretty calm, albeit rather windy out here amongst Qatar's mangrove forests, but there has been a real sense of urgency, making this in the middle of a pandemic that's brought the world to its knees, and which started because we have been bringing nature to its knees. COVID-19 is just one of many illnesses that has spilled over to us from wildlife, as we quite frankly plunder the natural world and come into closer contact with viruses found there. Ebola, SARS, HIV/AIDS, 3 out of 4 emerging infectious diseases come from animals, and one surfaces every 4 months. So the need to safeguard wild spaces like this one and to protect nature for its survival and our own has never been clearer. But the pandemic has also generated a desire for a green recovery, and that's what we're about here at Earthrise, solutions to the environmental crisis. We're starting this series by looking at protecting wildlife and therefore helping to prevent future outbreaks. Now, the exact origins of COVID-19 are unknown, but investigations have been carried out into the likes of bats and pangolins. And some species of these mammals are amongst the 1 million plants and animals threatened with extinction. But there is hope. In Vietnam, we meet the team rehabilitating trafficked pangolins. And in southern India, locals are defending the only remaining home of one critically endangered bat.
Nearly 1 in 5 mammals in the world is a bat. And the rumors that surround their existence are perhaps as extensive as the bat family itself. Associations with darkness and evil, witches and vampires, including Count Dracula, have led generations to see these flying creatures as sinister. But the granite hills of Kolar are home to a unique bat conservation story.
For decades, quarrying devastated this land, leaving it scarred and degraded. But that was forced to stop when a colony of bats was discovered in a cave in these hills, belonging to a species so rare that it was thought to be extinct. I've come to Karnataka in India to find out how conservationists and locals took on the mining industry to win protected status for this land, the last remaining home in the world of the Kolar leaf-nosed bat.
Only around 200.
Yeah.
All right.
So we can definitely send you the full link to the films and the other films also in the series so that you can check them out later.
Is also home to.
But with this series and with this particular episode, what we really wanted to, showcase was that even protecting something as small as a bat can have ripple effects. In the documentary, we realized that just because this entire conservation reserve was created for a small bat, smaller than the size of my palm, honestly, resulted in other species like leopards and birds and different kinds of animals coming back. And that's the power of rewilding, in our opinion. And as filmmakers, we tell difficult stories, but it was really amazing to tell a positive story like this one. And yeah, this is, just a brief summary of the couple of projects that we've worked on in the last 2 years. But we'd love to know if you have any questions for us about any of these or anything else in general about filmmaking and conservation.
Nobody? Okay, I'll start with a question. So how do you decide on, what, which animals to feature or what your next project is going to be? And where does the funding come from? Or, yeah.
So with the Manta film, for example, because it was a more difficult story, we found it hard to find like a network partner, like a television, a television network coming on board and saying that we're going to fund this. So a lot of it was funded with a grant from, a nonprofit. It was with friends who were helping along the way. So it was a very scrappy process. But with say with the elephant film for the BBC or our National Geographic series or with the bat film, all of these are funded by the television network like Nitye or Discovery or the BBC. But in terms of choosing the stories, it's often a different process where, as filmmakers, you constantly have to be aware. Like when we're not on shoot, we're reading about articles about conservation, interesting stories of local communities on the front lines of protecting wildlife, an amazing wildlife and natural history moment. And we have like a Google Doc that has all of these ideas. And then sometimes the network will come to you and be like, hey, we're doing this series on animals for children. So if you have any ideas about what could be interesting, let us know. And then we have the flexibility to really go in there and decide whichever story we want. And sometimes that, boils down to animals that we love. Like I love elephants, so we went with elephants for this film. But there are other times where it's more specific, like with the bat film. The producers at Al Jazeera knew that they wanted to make a documentary that shed some light on the post-pandemic situation and why protecting wild habitat is the solution to preventing future zoonotic diseases. And given that context, there were really only two animals that you could tell stories about in a way that is impactful in this particular situation, and that's bats and pangolins. And that's exactly what the film went with. So we do have, because we run our own production now, sometimes there are passion projects that we really care about and we pitch them to the world, but other times we have commissioners coming and asking us to do something and coming up with an idea. Like, for example, right now we're working on a project on how environmental pollution impacts vulnerable communities. And that's not a wildlife story, but it's a story that we care about, because for the longest time we've believed that pollution is an equalizer, but we're realizing, air pollution and water pollution and land pollution, that impacts our poorest communities the most, often communities who don't have access to healthcare. And that's what the next project that we're working on is all about.
Exactly. So if you do not have a commission or somebody hiring you to go tell a story about something, and that is something that you're passionate about, or you want to tell a story of a habitat or a species, then grants are a great way to do it. National Geographic has all sorts of grants, big grants for established filmmakers, as well as smaller grants for newcomers, for those which are early career grants. And that's a great way to try and fund your work. But also another way to do it is keep your filmmaking simple. All you need is an access to a camera and a story in your mind, and you start telling the story. And as you go along with it, and wonderful story on your hands, then you can try and get organizations involved, such as Wild Aid, in our Manta film, which was almost 2 years after we started making it. And that was the first time we got external funding to do it. Before that was just our little, passion project that we were working on.
Absolutely. We've got another question that I can see here, Nitye, from Kathleen's iPhone, that says, how did you get into filmmaking? I got into filmmaking, and Nitya can tell us about his story, but I got into filmmaking because I knew I wanted to be a wildlife presenter from the time I was 6 years old. I'm 24 now, but I've known this my entire life. I watched, Steve Irwin on television, and I would watch David Attenborough. And I always felt like, stories of my community weren't represented. I didn't see someone who looked like me on camera. I wanted to be the one telling those stories, both behind the camera as a director, but also on camera as a presenter. So for me, I always knew that this is something that I wanted to do. And right after high school, I didn't go to college. I got into wildlife filmmaking and working at a production house as a researcher. And as a scriptwriter, and then eventually I was doing a shoot with Nitye, the first shoot that he talked about Waghoba. And we had a presenter, actually. He was supposed to be on camera, but the presenter didn't turn out to be too happy to be on camera. It just didn't work out. So Nitye was asked by my previous boss at the time that, he had just had to film some behind the scenes videos of me. And it turned out that, those worked out decently. They were still terrible. Like, I cringe when I watch them now. And that made it into the film. That's how I got into filmmaking and presenting.
Right. And I think for me, I started making films while I was in engineering college. And that's what I studied, engineering. And it was just something that I started doing for fun on the side. And by the time I finished studying, I knew that I wanted to make films full time. I did not know there was documentaries at the time. I started with making short films and fiction films, and I even worked as an assistant director in a Bollywood film in Mumbai. But having done that, I came back from that shoot thinking to myself that this doesn't quite do it. Fiction is not interesting enough. There's not enough meaning in it for me. And I came back and started looking for people who are working in documentary films. I started assisting somebody in Bangalore. And after a few years of working with other people, I started working independently. And Malaika and I have been making films for a while, almost 3-4 years now. Yeah.
Yeah. And honestly, it is one of the most exciting jobs in the world because like everything is it's different every
I
single.
can take any other questions that.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Sorry, I was just saying that it's a really exciting job for us and really fulfilling also because 1 month you get to be, diving with tiger sharks like we were just recently in the Maldives, and telling stories about exciting wildlife moments. But then another month you can tell a story about something that is more personal, like the environmental pollution series. And I think that diversity is what calls us to this profession.
So how long on average does it take to like make a film, and do you have to do sort of overlapping projects?
Mm. Oh yeah. So sometimes you have to do projects just to pay the bills, and that's sometimes commercial shorter projects, like say we did a branded content video with Samsung and Nitye Traveler, and that was a quick shoot in the Maldives. But then there are projects like, for example, the Manta film took 3.5 years, and in between I did a television series for Discovery. We did the Living with Predator series. We did other films in between. So it really depends, but I'd say on average, now that we're working on one project at a time, it takes us about 2 months for the pre-production, which is the research, the script writing, sometimes 3 months, or 4 months, depending on how long the project is. Like with our current project, that's 1 hour long films into three. That's taking a bit longer, but say 3 to 4 months for the pre-production, about 2 months to shoot. Sometimes you might want to go back, but usually about 2 months to do the entire shooting, and then about 3 months to do the edit as well. And very often, while we're doing the edit for one project, we're doing pre-production for another project or planning out another project so that we're pretty much on the go, from one place to another, one story to another.
And sometimes on larger projects, you kind of split it up. You go film for a little bit, and then you need to get the ball rolling for your next set of shoots or figure certain things out. So then you go and do another project that might be a smaller, more commercial project, and then you come back to your big project, which is more long term, and do more shoots for that until you feel like you have enough content to tell the story properly and do it justice.
Yeah.
Malaika, do you want me to take the remaining questions if you need
No,
to go?
Oh yeah, I have to head to a quick doctor's appointment in 5 minutes, but I would love to answer the last question before I go because it's about undercover filmmaking. What are the things to be aware of regarding filming undercover, especially regarding filming people who are not specifically giving their consent to be filmed? Thank you, Angela, for that question. And that's interesting because, when we're filming undercover, it's completely different in each situation. You never can plan it. It's not something that you can ever plan, but you just have to make sure that you have a really convincing cover story. So if you say you are a student, you need to have like a student ID card. You need to know exactly what you're talking about. There are smart people who you're going to be filming with undercover, and they will ask you those questions, and if you don't know what you're doing, it's really easy to get into a very dangerous situation, which is not good for the conservation issue or for yourself and your team's safety. So do your background research. If you're a scientist, know what you're talking about. If you're a teacher in that moment, know what you're talking about. When I'm a seafood trader, I have a seafood trader vibe. I never dress up. I'm the worst at dressing up, but I dress up when I'm a seafood trader. I wear like a businessy coat because that allows me to come across differently on camera and differently to the people I'm interacting with. And then another thing that I would say with investigative filmmaking is don't do investigative filmmaking where it's not required. In some places, people will talk to you. They will open up their hearts and actually tell you about why they do what they do. With the China and Hong Kong part of the filmmaking, we were filming with a lot of dangerous kingpins and traffickers. So we had to film undercover. But when we were filming in Andhra Pradesh, which is in my hometown, like in my own home country, and we were filming with fishermen, we weren't undercover. We often told them that we're filming, we're making this documentary, and we really, really, really care about, these animals, and we'd love to understand how you think about this. And most often, when you tell people what your intentions are, even if they disagree with you, they will talk to you about it. And that's amazing to just capture on camera, because no one's a villain. Every single person, whether they're a terrorist or whether they're a manta ray trafficker, is trying to feed their families. They're trying to do something that will protect their families at the end of the day. And just understanding their incentives helps you to craft, I think, a much more strong story and protect the animals and the communities who depend on these animals right now.
I'll just try and answer the last
Yeah.
question there, which says, how do you move viewers to action and channel their energy? Honestly, that's not easy. It's not. we see a lot of content, we come across a lot of issues, and there's fatigue, there's helplessness, there's this whole feeling of being overwhelmed. A problem just seems too big to do anything about on your own. And I mean, honestly, this might sound a little cliche, but it kind of begins with awareness. As a filmmaker, specifically, our job is to show viewers what the issues are and why these issues exist, and perhaps get them interested enough to go beyond the film itself, get them interested enough to learn more about the issue and see what they can do. Of course, as a filmmaker, if we can provide the avenue for the viewer to do something more after the film is over, after they switch off the film, for them to do something more than that is, I think, that is the goal, and that's the ideal scenario as a filmmaker that you can do. But having said that, that's something that is difficult, that we struggled with a lot with our Manta Ray film, for instance. With our Manta Ray film, we could think of creating a policy proposal and approaching the government and trying to get Manta Rays listed under the protected list in India. But how do you get an average viewer to be able to do something about the issue? I think the best we were able to do was just get people to know that there are Manta Rays in India and they're being caught, and something should be done about that, hopefully, so that hopefully there's a conversation around it that starts. I think certain films have done a really good job of getting viewers charged up and getting involved, such as Racing Extinction. If you guys have watched that, a lot of impact-oriented films now have websites along with their films where you can, immediately after you watch the film, you log onto the website, and then they give you a list of organizations or NGOs that might be doing good work. You can donate, or maybe better than that, you volunteer your time or efforts in whatever way possible. So that's ideal, but that's difficult to do, and certain topics lend themselves to that kind of involvement, certain topics don't. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. I have a question. What's your next project?
Our next project? Right. So that's something that Malaika briefly mentioned. We're going to be doing a 3-part series on environmental pollution.
Oh, yeah.
And talking about how pollution impacts vulnerable communities much more than people who can have the privilege or have the means to insulate themselves from, say, dirty air or dirty water or dirty land. So it's going to be 3 one-hour films focusing on land, air, and water pollution. And in general, most of our films, we try and keep it solutions oriented. So while we talk about the problem and lay out the issues, we want to try and talk about what the potential solutions could be. And specifically, like right now, we are working on the scripts for these films. And it's a challenge because a problem like pollution does not have easy solutions. It's daunting. Some of these things can only be solved if lots and lots of different things fall in place, including government action and industry action and innovation. But yeah, that's the story that we want to tell, focusing on equity, focusing on how this issue impacts different people differently, because so far it's the common narrative has been that pollution is an equalizer. It affects everyone the same way, but that's not quite true. And we want to bring that to the front.
And is that going to be, is that based in India as well?
We're filming in 3 countries for this. So we will be talking about land pollution in India, water pollution in Bangladesh, and air pollution in Mongolia.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're quite excited to start telling the story, and we should be filming soon. We're going to start soon in a few weeks' time. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Best of luck with everything.
Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks so much, Michelle, and thanks to everyone for coming and participating in this. Do we have any other questions? Anyone want to say anything?
I think
Okay.
like that's all. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot for your time.
Are you gonna let us know where we can watch this, all of your movies?
Sure. So I can share our website with you. Some of our shorter films are available online on YouTube, etc. The broadcast films are they depend on the air dates and the broadcast schedule. However, our Big Cat series, which is on lions, leopards, and tigers, that's available on Hotstar or Disney Plus.
Isian has a question in the chat. How do you not get jaded?
I mean, that's a tough question, and obviously something that I've struggled with. I think there are a couple of different aspects to it. You do need a certain element of blind optimism. That it's. I mean, I'm drawing a parallel to blind faith. You kind of need a little bit of that to keep going. But then it's not just about that. If you look around, obviously there are a lot of things that pull you down that are negative, and you feel overwhelmed with the challenges. But then there is a lot, and I mean a lot of good work being done in every corner, every project that we work on. As daunting as the issue is, there are people putting in that effort and doing phenomenal work to match that challenge. You kind of have to have faith in that and support such people, support such initiatives, and do your bit. That's a cliche, but yeah, you got to do your bit and have faith. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah. Thanks, guys.
I think, yeah. No more questions. Thanks a lot.
All right, guys. Okay.
Yeah, I'll see you sometime.
Bye.
Okay. Bye.